All right, Phil, take it away for us.
Okay, well, this is sort of I don't know exactly how to describe it, but I'm a public intellectual with a very large body of work, and I make most of it which is out on the internet. And through my academic and public intellectual lifetime, I've met with a number of people. And this is for a guy named Ruben. I'm not going to give out his last name just because I don't know that I don't have his permission. But in any case, he is a theologian and he specializes in Buddhist studies and Eastern religions. And he has a Christian theological background. He's sort of 18 because he's also a Jesuit priest. And he's been kind enough to be supportive in the work I've done and in my physical recovery. And I've been thinking about, I want to send him some papers, and I want some other people to be able to access my papers if they want to. So I'm going through my work now, and I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do? And I think I'm going to do kind of an electronic guide or catalog or something like that. And that's one reason I know we get a little overextended sometimes, and I know I don't always have something to say. But I'll start this one out a little bit lightly because at one of our programs we talked about methamphetamine and the effect that it had on on the German army and the Nazi party and the SS, and how it seemed to give soldiers almost superhuman strength. And as we were talking about that, I insisted that my old friend Mike Ducharme, kind of a retired librarian and telemarketer, and he sort of works with me. He said, "Well, it's kind of interesting what you're talking about, and the fact that you're missing one of your front teeth almost makes it look like you're a user or something. So, if nothing else, this may be the first program, I don't think we've done one, where I celebrate my new smile, because I've got $4,000 worth of dental work here, and it seems I love it. I don't even think I have it. I was trying to think about current history, and when we started this series, we were talking about occult existential threats. And one of the things, I'll get to the historical stuff in a bit, but last night we watched something on 60 Minutes that had been made in 2013 about super bugs and hospital infections and antibiotic resistant infections like MRSA and things like that. And it's something that I, even as an informed citizen, know absolutely nothing about. But apparently, the thing I saw was Frontline in 2000. It was made, I think, in 2013. And they explained the paradigm of why most antibiotic research has stopped. Because the idea is that when you develop an antibiotic, you want to use it sparingly. And if it's used sparingly, then you don't sell as much of it. And if you don't sell as much of it, there's not as much of a profit margin. And I was wondering, it was 2013 when this program was made, also the same year that the NFL head trauma came out, where the one, I guess, Nigerian I'm trying to think of the word pathologist, identified the damage in Mike Webster. But I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about how the war of the superbugs is going now, and if that relates at all to the COVID situation or any of the subsequent, or monkey virus for that matter, or any of the subsequent infections that we assumed would just go away. And as I think about that, I've got a theme maybe for the rest of the program too.
Mhm.
So, what would you say about the situation for antibiotic resistant drugs now? Is it worse? Has progress been made? Should we be very scared and worried?
Yeah, well, I didn't prepare anything at all, so I won't talk a ton, but yeah, we should be afraid. As far as I know, not a lot of progress has been made, but since I retired, I don't really keep up with it like I used to.
Yeah.
As far as like monkeypox and coronavirus, like coronavirus is kind of a brand new virus um, released on the world, so it's kind of unrelated to antimicrobial resistance. So the problem with the antimicrobial resistance is it's kind of bugs that we used to have simple cures for, like you mentioned MRSA when you were talking before. That used to be very easily treated with penicillin type drugs, and then over time it becomes resistant to our most commonly used antibiotics. And so it's kind of like the problem with resistance has more to do with the type of bugs that cause infections that have been around for a very long time. So it's kind of like the opposite end of the spectrum from like coronavirus, in the sense that that's like a novel threat, like something new that we haven't seen before. So we didn't have something developed to fight it. And this is kind of the opposite, like you're saying MRSA, and there's a whole bunch of different ones too. But like MRSA is something, when they developed penicillin wasn't a problem, right? Just treat it with your common penicillin type drugs, and probably had a lot to do with increasing life expectancy and everything like that. And then over time, as you keep exposing those bacteria, the methicillin resistant Staph aureus in this case, it becomes it becomes smart, and it can figure out how to evade the antibiotic you're treating it with. Um, so yeah, it's just it's interesting. Like they kind of like learn how to you know um, machine things that actually attack the antibiotic that you're using to try to kill the bug. So and yeah, I mean, I don't think any magic bullets have been made on that front as far as fighting those resistant bacteria. It's just something that just kind of quietly gets worse over time. And as you mentioned, perhaps not the biggest financial incentive for drug companies to
Mhm.
put a lot of resources into coming up with a solution.
You know how I sort of I'm a person who gets his ideas by talking with other people, letting them sort of bounce off, and then something will catch in my mind, and I'll draw a parallel. And sometimes the parallel has to be developed a bit more carefully, and I work on doing that. Not always successful, but what's working its way into the discourse and some of the scientific literature in general is an epidemiological spread of of pernicious things, and along with, I would say, with pernicious entities. I guess entity is the word we're using. Entity a lot with our discussion of political theory, but I think political ideas spread in an epidemiological sense. And and a rather unfortunate ideology came into the forefront about with your generation, Brock. And it came from an idea of a guy named Francis Fukuyama. And he wrote something called The End of History and the Last Man. And it came out almost exactly at the time that the Soviet Union collapsed. And its idea was that, well, liberal democracies had won, the World War was over, and now it was just a path. It may have been a long path, but we were going for liberal democracy and capitalism, and it was absolutely the best system in the world, and it had evolutionarily survived. Now, it's interesting who picked that up. You know, it involves some foreign policy issues under the Obama administration and surely under the Trump administration, where we said, well, we don't need NATO anymore. NATO is a joke. Those people should pay for their own defense, you know. And well, we were thinking about that and teaching in our schools, I guess what I would call the identity politics of history. And by this, I mean the politics of whatever group might be seeking a way to locate themselves in the historical narrative. History was moving on. And it may not seem, I know a lot about Russian history. I've done some pretty important reviews, and I worked with Professor Lazda at UW-Eau Claire. And people would, often history was taught. I happened to be hanging around the undergraduate world for a number of years, as if we don't need to study those old white men. What we should do is learn about the humanity of the day-to-day lives of most people and see what we can learn for today and how we're better than them. But while we were thinking about that, someone like Putin was thinking of himself as restoring the Soviet Union to its greatness and comparing himself to Peter the Great. And not only to Peter the Great, but having sort of a kind of a wink and a nod to the atrocities of Stalin. And now it's almost as if the history is repeating itself, and the stakes are ever so much higher. You know, the fact that we live in a world where after almost 80 years of peace, nuclear war is a lot closer to the edge of the horizon. Maybe it's monstrously looking over, or it's like giant feet walking across the land, than it was when we started this series. What was it, October of 2021 or something like that?
Yeah.
Now, as I say this, you know, the you say, well, what is to be done? Well, what can you do? Can you isolate yourself? Is there a place to hide? Well, I think not. I think so much of I'm looking here out my window, sitting on this YouTube thing we're making, fully comfortable, living with sort of in a glass bubble with a world that has a population of 7.5 million, most of whom aren't really doing well, wondering how the climate-induced changes are going to affect national policy as they always do, and thinking what to do next. You got any ideas, Brock?
No. No, I don't.
Well, I mean, I think that some sort of survivalist narrative might be the best you can do, and that's that really only speaks to the individual.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing is to examine how we got here and if there's anything that can be learned from it. Um,
Well, in the process of going through my papers, and it's a huge amount, and I guess I'm not going to worry with my fiction or my reviews or anything else about the quality, but I feel kind of an obligation to all the editors I've had over the years that have put the work in that's necessary. But I remember I was looking at for the last 45 years I've reviewed for Jim Cox's Midwest Book Review, and I've probably written a couple hundred book reviews easily, and publishers are delighted to give us these books because it gives kind of an exposure in the public sphere, and it's a selection tool for libraries. But I wrote this paper, this review. It's probably a couple thousand words long, and it's a defense of the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment is something that really happened in Europe. It starts with something called the Glorious Revolution, and this was a transfer of power in England in 1689 that didn't involve a bloody civil war. Now, nearly, I would suspect that if I would take a sample of college students and ask them if they knew anything about the English Civil War, which was nearly as bloody as ours in proportion and cost nearly as much. And the answer I would get, I suspect, is, well, do I have to know that for the test? Well, I'm going to back off to 1648. And I know I'm kind of rambling here a little bit, but there was something called the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, and that proceeded from a European experience called the 30 Years' War. And the thing I wish someone could do is say, no, these aren't things you read about in the book. These are real things that happen to people. And Catholics and Protestants would kill each other over religious doctrine, just as Hindus and Mohammed and Islamics do in Egypt. But for a while, or in India, for a while, however, there was a point where Europeans in the scientific mind, and that's where you come in. You have a respect for reason and inquiry, but they said, well, why don't we stop killing each other? Wouldn't it be better if we made the world better and made it better for us, and we didn't die in these sieges and such? And so a deal was almost made where war would be fought in a different way. And for 100 and after the end of I just realized the English Civil War came almost directly after the 30 Years' War. And actually, both of those wars were about religion. But in the 1688, England decided that they had to have a Protestant king, and they were in danger of having Catholicism be imposed on it. So they did something called the Glorious Revolution, and that set a stage where people could stop killing each other long enough that you could develop what we call a parliamentary democracy. But but parliamentary democracies would seem to come after catastrophic events. Now, do I am I making myself clear?
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, there was this book, and I would have died for it. It was wonderful. It was a 4-volume history of the Enlightenment. And there was no, it wasn't. It was called the Enlightenment Encyclopedia, and 4 volumes, $495, and it just you could look something up. You could look up, for example, that Isaac Newton not only was the founder of the scientific way of looking at the world, but he also tried to rewrite the Bible to make the Old Testament, different parts of it, coherent. And I would go into a certain library. I'm not going to say which one it was, because I have no malice towards library selectors, though I do have advanced academic qualifications in the field. And that book got discarded because it was assumed that nobody would ever use that again because it's all online. And of course, it's not all online. There's lots and lots of stuff that will never be duplicated. And once something is online, it's under control. You know, you need access. And if you go to a place like China, I suspect that a lot of the things that we consider to be just given are unavailable. I just thought of something that amazes me. I know I've been talking 17th century, but most people do not know that during the Second World War, Russia was our best and strongest ally, and America paid for 20% of the expense of the Russian of the Soviet Union's war against the Nazis. But now, neither side chooses to teach that. And if you teach in Russia now that there was a wartime cooperation between Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill, you can end up with your butt in the slammer. And so that knowledge is not known, and instead you have almost a celebration of death in terms of rock concerts in Red Square. And I come from a generation of protest, and that's not how we learned it. We thought that we were a liberal democracy, and during the Vietnam era, we all thought, never again, never again, never again. But it happens again. It happens again and again and again. Well, I've mostly just rambled, and I guess I'm going to keep doing my writing. Any other questions? You know what we should do, Brock?
What's that?
Well, let's put a sidebar in this ramble again to say that I mentioned that I am going to be working on this stuff, and it's amazing that I can have the support that I do to do what I'm doing. Oh, I wanted to say that if you and Trish were interested in going to the Fiddler on the Roof, the production of it in Eau Claire, I can get you 2 tickets for $150. People, I mean, the kind of world, we live in that kind of world, and people actually pay for it, and that's okay because it's part of the good life. But it could all be just washed away like tears in the rain. Well, that's about the end of what I'm going to say. But we were talking about chess, Brock, and I want to give a big promo to the videos you're making. And remember, I was trying to ask you a question about endgame pawn axioms and when those axioms didn't hold.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a game last night. It's a draw, and it looked like because White had an extra pawn, it looked like for certain he he would win because I would have to move. He would have the opposition, and then queen the pawn. But what happened was he got into that position. My king's on the last rank. His pawn is between it, and his king is behind it. And so what I was able to do was put him in a position where he had to move after that.
Right.
So,
Zooms
and I
on.
thought, gee, that's that's pretty neat. That's pretty neat. There were four pawns on the clock, and if he tried to win, he would lose because I put the pawn in such a position that he could walk down and queen, but I had no moves. So I managed that position in such a way as I pulled the last resource out by giving him that move. He's gonna queen for sure, but I have no moves. So I guess I put myself in Zutzwan.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm I was just before I got on with you, I was putting some material together for a video I'm going to make on. I made some on rook pawns, and then I'm going to make some on rook pawn and bishop um, versus a lone king, and then the right colored bishop and wrong colored bishop. But anyway, you think we should stop the recording here?
I think we should stop the recording here.
Yeah. Okay.
And I will say that publicly saying this, putting this out, is going to help me because as I do this, I'm reworking my Philip of Traer with Kathy Courier, and she has done a wonderful job of editing. And if we're in a world where we can pay $150 for a couple theater tickets, and I'm not going, I can throw $150 down a publishing rat hole, right?
Sounds good. Yeah, certainly. Well, let's sign off in our traditional way.
Oh yeah, right.